Well, the first topic that I wanted to talk about just straight off the bat was this study that came out. And I don't want to throw our Jamie Lewis under the bus, but he mentioned in one of our recent podcasts that intermittent fasting has been linked to heart disease and will definitely explode your heart, just to put it into his words.
But they're advertising it as something good because the AMA literally just put out studies that were like, it gives you heart disease. It's unequivocal that intermittent fasting gives you heart disease. They haven't figured out how, but they're like, it just does.
But a lot of these studies, they've been debunked by quite a number of people that I follow. But you look at the studies, and quite often they're people that fill in a survey, they gather this data, and what you're not seeing is what they're eating, what their underlying health conditions are. So very dubious studies, a lot of these epidemiological studies. So
one of my first reactions when I see something like this announced in the media that was so counterintuitive is I always think, who's funding this shit and whose puppet strings are they trying to tug on? Because the first thing that I've noticed about this study is it's not even peer reviewed and it's not even published in any serious academic journals at the time of reporting. And like you said, the study relied on self-reported data from participants. And what was significant about the self-reported data, it was only for 2 days of the year with no controls for other than the fasting windows or the diet. What also stood out to me was that the study was conducted by a research organization from a Chinese university. And a lot of the commenters expressed a lot of skepticism about the reliability of studies from China. And what was kind of funny is the American Heart Association, who came out and corroborated the study, they basically had published a lot of pro-intermittent fasting studies in the past. And yeah, it just seemed quite a contradiction in terms. So I don't know. I don't think that intermittent fasting at this stage is a definite smoking gun that we can say is going to cause any problems.
Yeah, look, just in line with what you just said about those that intermittent fasting study there with the it was probably one of the big food companies that was funding that study. Who knows? But then I read recently from it was an article I think in the New Yorker, which is typically a left-wing publication. There was a lady there that wrote that that if you for those people that like to look after themselves and look good and eat meat, are right-wing jerks. So one of the guys that I like to follow, Mike Mutzel from High Intensity Health on YouTube, he did a bit of a recap on that. It was quite interesting.
Getting fit is great, but it could turn you into an alt-right conspiracy theorist. This is according to Zoe Williams over at The Guardian. Now, what I think is really interesting about these opinion pieces, anyone can share their opinion. I really don't care. But what I think is interesting is that the mainstream legacy media continues to promote this idea that getting fit and in shape and following the wellness trend is somehow going to turn you into a fascist.
Yeah, I don't know why everything has to be politicized in this way. The politics in this country used to be pretty low key, but now it's becoming even more pronounced as time goes on. And it always seems that the people that are behind these talking points are the real life fascists behind it, because they're trying to dictate what people should or shouldn't do. And it's amazing what they consider far right these days, because it seems that anybody that's just trying to better their lives through self-improvement, like I said, eating meat, being normal, staying healthy, getting involved with fitness, having good mental health, that's equivalated with the far right. Because also, I sort of think at the end of the day, strong, independent people are difficult to control. So,
well, that's right. But I've always been a person that questions things, right? And so, but if you question something in this left-wing climate that we have in Australia and America, immediately you're like I say, classified as a right-wing jerk. It's just mind-boggling to me. But you're looking for solutions to things. You're looking for ways to improve your health. And you want to look good. Eating meat, it seems to be a big part of that, but I don't know. You just you're some sort of a right-wing nut job. Yeah.
So whenever somebody kind of introduces one of these talking points, I never like to dismiss it out of hand. I always want to dig a little bit deeper into their thinking. I sort of thought, why would somebody equate fitness or bodybuilding with far-right fascist mentalities? And I sort of thought that, okay, if you were to lean on their side a little bit, you might sort of think that bodybuilding lends itself to hyper-individualism, which may be associated with far-right ideologies. I also sort of think that, when some people get into the gym, they tend to have, insecurities for whatever reason. And when they work out and build themselves up, there may be a tendency for them to lean into their feelings of superiority over others. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I would agree. you know, what we know about left wing, or not left wing, but leftist sort of the mentality is that it's very sheep-like. You know, people that they want everyone to just be part of the masses. So being an individual doesn't fit in with that. You know, I would agree with what you're saying, but I think one of the reasons I've moved away from the left is I've always liked to consider myself an individual anyway.
Remember in Japan they used to have a saying that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, and that's very much the equivalency in today's political climate, where it seems that if you speak out about any of these things that don't toe a certain narrative or a party line, you are definitely going to get hammered down and cancelled, or whatever else that they can do to dictate, you know, your thinking. But you know, it just seems quite strange, because, you know, my experience and your experience probably as well, because you are friends and you move through so many different social circles in bodybuilding throughout your, you know, 40 plus year involvement. But I've always found that the fitness community is one of the amazing kind of life experiences, because you meet a real diverse, broad thinking, multi-political, you know, both genders, men, women, whoever, that are involved in this like-minded enterprise of wanting to improve yourself, improve your mental health, better your body. And we don't bring politics into the gym at all. And it just seems like this is just another divisive strategy that they have to want to make everybody claw at each other's throats and see everything as this, you know, political labeled activity. Yeah,
I know. I agree. And, you know, you are correct in saying that the bodybuilding health and fitness community is very eclectic. You know, in terms of what they do in their own lives. And I must admit, that's one of the things I've really enjoyed. I've got lots of friends that are in the bodybuilding community, and they are from all different backgrounds. And it's great. It's really great having a get-together with those sorts of people, because we're like-minded and we're still into self-improvement and all that sort of thing. We always divert back to that. So there's relief. There's relief from that sort of discussion when you get together with those sorts of people. So it's an interesting point for sure.
One topic that seems to be dividing the bodybuilding public these days, or the fans, is you know, the tendency of, do today's guys train hard at all? And there was a really good line, or, you know, part in the podcast, Muscle and Fitness, run by Dennis, Milos, Chris, and they had Shawn on. And there was a video clip that was released recently called "The Battle for the Olympia" or something, a battle of the Olympia, and it had, you know, Nick Walker, Shawn, Samson Dowder.
That's right, Derek Lunsford.
And Derek Lunsford. And, you know, they were, that's it. And they were doing a workout together. And the guys on that podcast were actually quite critical. And they were sort of saying that, you know, again, we had that old manism that, you know, creeps into a lot of our thoughts, that these guys were particularly sort of saying that these guys don't train hard. The intensity wasn't there. They saw nothing special behind their workouts.
Yeah. Here's the difference. If that had been me, you, Chris, and Milos in the gym, the amount of content that they would have got from us, from our mouth.
The trash talk alone. The trash talk would have made the whole video.
And I know Chris would have tried to put on all the weight to try to outlift me, and I would have upped the rates, repetitions. We would have been really training.
Yeah.
It would have been something to see.
It was good, man. The only thing that I think would be
but Chris, think about it. It was good for the time now. Back then, that shit would have not been good enough.
Now, you know, you follow a lot of these guys really closely, probably more so than most people. What do you think of the reality behind guys like Nick, Derek, and Samson's training?
What I've noticed in probably the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of the guys have learned from the past. They've learned from the injuries of the guys of the past, with the, you know, the tendons that snap and all the rest of it with super heavy lifts. I've noticed that they're still training to failure, but they're just more mindful about the way that they lift. So I'm just finding that their form and their rep tempo is super strict. Like if you look at someone like Nick Walker, the way he moves the weights, he's really got that mind to muscle connection, which they reckon a champion needs. He still goes very heavy, but it's a lot more controlled. I think a lot of, I mean, even Derek, I've watched some of his videos, and the way that they move the weights is just absolutely just perfection. And they're still going heavy. They're still lifting, 150, 160 pound dumbbells for, shoulder presses, still doing, 5-6 plate, squats and things like that. But I think they're very, very mindful. So what
do you think it is about the older guys of the sport? These seasoned pros and commentators like Shawn, Dennis, Milos, etc. they're knee deep in the sport anyway. They're always behind the scenes, yet they're also so ultra critical. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Because they must see the same training as you and I do.
I've seen some Shawn Ray's old workout videos, and there's nothing special there. He certainly doesn't. He said the weights that he lifted certainly wasn't that heavy anyway. But unfortunately, with Shawn Ray, I feel that he's still got that chip on his shoulder. he's never lost it since Dorian Yates beat him in the Olympia all those years ago. He's just so.
I think this is bodybuilding where they're all hyper individuals and they're all very ego-driven guys. I think Shawn just vocalizes that chip a little bit louder, but the rest is better at hiding it, perhaps.
He does. I'm just not sure where it comes from, really. Maybe, Dennis James, I think he's a little bit more supportive of the ways guys train these days.
No, he was the one that was most virulent in that they don't train. They weren't training. He said that there was nothing special that he saw in those clips and blah, blah, blah. And then they were critical of Dennis because he hadn't watched the full thing. And he had.
Well, there you go. There lies the problem. Yeah, but I really don't think that these particular characters are watching any of their workout videos, any of their YouTube channels. They probably don't know really how they train. They're just surmising that's maybe the case. So I'm not sure that they're super. I don't think that well informed. I really don't. They're just some of them have, just got that old school chip on their shoulder a little bit. I don't know why. I know I call him Shawn Ray, not Shawn Ray. Shawn Ray. It's just it just seems to poo-poo everything.
With Shawn Ray, to me, we have this kind of conversation in private quite often, but I always think that Shawn has a lot of legitimate points and the good things that he's done for the sport and helped the athletes along the way and put his money where his mouth is, so to speak, has been very beneficial, where a lot of other guys have just, kept quiet because they didn't want to rock the boat or lose their contracts. And then they've also not done anything for the sport either. Whereas you need these guys like Shawn and Lee Priest who don't always, again, toe the party line, because you got to remember back in the Weider days, tyranny, it was, you want to talk fascism, fucking Weider was like the Hitler of bodybuilding. And, if you spoke out about the way the Weeders did things, you found out about it in your contest placings and your sponsorships that got dropped. So for guys like Shawn and Lee to speak out back in those days, they were the one putting the targets on their back. And people can say, oh, they complain and they whinge and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but at the end of the day, nothing gets changed. And bodybuilding was a sport and an organization which needed massive overhaul and change from the ground up. So no one else was going to do it except for those two guys, but they definitely got the ball rolling on a lot of things. Who created the 212? It was Shawn Ray. He was the one that first put the money up. Who probably boosted a lot of the pricing and put the emphasis on the posing. It was Shawn Ray. He coughed up a lot of money in terms of wanting to donate, prizes to the best poser, but they wouldn't let him because it would then make the contest winnings themselves look poor by comparison. So yeah, I've got a lot of kind of resonance with Shawn Ray.
Look, I do agree with you there. Kudos to Shawn for back in the day. I've seen the Mr. Olympia press conference when he was competing, and the way he spoke up was, credit where credit's due. That took a lot of guts. And so he definitely put his money where his mouth is. With some of those, with Wayne D'Amelio, he really it would have been it wouldn't have been invited. It wouldn't have been getting Christmas cards from Wayne D'Amelio, I don't think. Put it that way.
Yeah, those two hated each other. Yeah.
But I think a lot of Shawn's discontent these days stems from just, I don't know, he's almost got that little man syndrome. It was a smaller bodybuilder back then and got beaten by the mass monsters, and he's just never gotten over that.
Not always deservedly so, and a lot of the mass monsters he also beat as well. You got to think that he had some of the best contest placings of all time. So I don't think the chip could arise from his actual contest placings. Yes, he got beaten by Dorian a few times, where I think history has now argued that Dorian probably shouldn't have won in those cases. Yeah, Dorian can call it a points contest for all he wants. At the end of the day, it's a contest to decide who the best built man on the stage is of that day. And sorry, you don't win a contest. You don't win a best built man contest with a torn bicep and a bloated stomach and a running tan. And for Shawn to call that out, that's just, I think, fair enough.
Yeah. Well, you and I will always beg to differ with.
I know that you're a Dorian nut hugger. Sorry to use those words, but
yeah.
You can't get between a Brit and their love for Dorian. I've always found. So no matter what Dorian does, says, you can talk about, the Holocaust and all the rest, and people are still like, "Yeah, go Dorian."
Oh no! Don't get me started on that. I've become disenchanted with a lot of his views in recent years, especially with all of his marijuana use and some of those things that have come to bear. No, I'm just.
He's another one that's so hypercritical of the guys these days, Craig. If you notice in the interviews that he's put out, he says they don't train hard and they don't look as good and they wouldn't win a contest, they wouldn't get a placing in the top 10 in the 90s. So he's another one that shits all over. And it seems to be like just a common thread in the theme between all these older guys.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Shawn. That there seems to be this old school chip on the shoulder. I don't get it. I mean, because you and I are old school, but I haven't got a chip on my shoulder. I just love the sport.
You're definitely a purist. And I think this next clip that we talk about with it was a really good interview recently with Ron Harris and Lee Haney. And, straight off the bat, it was bringing up the fact that Lee Haney had made some disparaging comments about the guys these days, calling them squat, deformed dwarfs or something like this. He was extremely critical. And we all know that Lee Haney, he was, I think, if you were to, list the top 10 bodybuilders of all time, Lee Haney would definitely be up there.
A couple of weeks ago, you posted this. It was an old Twin Lab ad with your kneeling side chest. And you wrote, "Is it just me? Or does 90% of the current group of bodybuilders have the same squatty shape, wide waist, big arms, overly developed quads, small calves, and weird shoulders? It looks as though somebody closed their eyes and threw muscle at a dartboard without giving it any thought. The new Frankenstein era." And goodness gracious, that went virally.
He's basically his common theme was that the guys look awful today and that bodybuilding's lost its way. So forgetting about the fact that the guys train hard, what do you think in regards to the guys, looking awful in the eyes of not just the general public, but the average bodybuilding fan these days?
Look, I think there's a lot to be said. A lot of these older guys, like Shawn Ray, particularly Bob Ciccarello, is another one, Lee Haney. They tend to like a physique that was similar to theirs. They that's what they seem to be drawn to. And they just can't think sideways. They can't look sideways. So Lee Haney was just masthetic. He was fantastic. And he's definitely, I mean, if we get a chance to talk about our favourite top 5 Mr. Olympias of all time, he's in my top 5. But, obviously times changed. The waistline thickened up. But there again, some of these characters now, like Samson Dowder and even Derek Lunsford, even Hadi Choopan, they're bringing their waist in. Nick Walker, in the recent showing, pulled it in after that guest posing that everyone criticised him for. But I just think, sure, their waistlines are going to be a little bit thicker, but then the guys are getting on stage 20, 30 pounds heavier at 5'7", 5'8". They're heavier than Lee Haney, and they're shorter. So naturally, they're going to be a little bit thicker in certain areas, but.
I think that was Lee's point of contention, though, because, growth has its limits. We can't eventually have a guy that's 5'6" and 400 pounds on stage. At a certain point, the proportions have to give way. And I think a lot of the criticism that, pointed at the bodies of today is that the proportions and the symmetry have been lost. And, you can argue the fact that there is symmetry and proportion, but it's overblown and it doesn't look visually appealing to the eyes. The eyes are a really good judge of what it sees. And when we cast our minds back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and the 90s, there came a point where it slipped away. And I think Dorian bears a lot of the blame and the brunt for that argument as well, that he changed the game when it came to the proportionality of the judging. And it's only became a declining factor in the eyes of many fans since then. Beauty of bodybuilding, what it was originally intended to be, the best built man on stage, everything taken into account, skin health, face, hair, has been lost and jettisoned by the wayside in size of a freak show.
Look, I agree with you, from several aspects there. But one thing that I have noticed, though, in the last 5 years, and we can credit Arnold to this with Arnold Classics, is that guys have been punished on stage by the judges for distended stomachs. So and things like Guido and stuff like that. So they're getting punished for that. So we have seen it was worse. The bubble gut doesn't seem the term bubble gut doesn't seem to be thrown around these days as much. But 5 to 10 years ago, it was really bad. And then Arnold, voiced his concerns about it, and competitors were getting marked down at the Arnold Classic, and now that's happening, in the pro league stage in general. So,
and going back to our point on, people that are being outspoken and criticizing, people could have just dismissed Arnold for back then, but sort of saying, "Oh, this is not your era, champ," and you're just being dismissive of the guys that are bigger and better than you today. But the fact that he called it out and that he again had put his money where his mouth is, because he's one of the major backers of the sport financially, he was able to change the game by being quote unquote negative in that particular context. And I think this is why it's important for some of these older guys who were the original bastions of the sport, like Lee Haney, and did win it 8 times. Because another kind of point that he made, which I thought was quite interesting, was the detrimental part of these physiques being so extreme is that they also turn off future talent that could be possibly attracted to the sport. And before, we saw a very broad mix of diverse shapes and sizes when it came to bodybuilding. You had your Lee Labradas, your Markaways, your Samir Benouts competing with your Ralph Mollers, your Bob Parises, your Lee Haneys, with your Rich Gasparis, your Sean Rays. And even up into the 90s, you still had a caliber of diversity, because you had basically your 212 guys like Shawn, competing with the mass monsters. But now the trend that bodybuilding is going, we're not going to be seeing the same attraction of talent for the future pools of bodybuilding. What do you think?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. There's a point to what you're saying. But interestingly, though, some of these smaller guys that were former 212 competitors are starting to win. You've only got to look at Derek. Hardy.
And that's another point in itself. Sorry to butt in, but you have the smaller guys appearing more massive by the extreme standards of the sport, because they're able to fit more onto their smaller frames and give that appearance of monstrosity, bigger than the taller guys, maybe like Andrew Jack, who Lee Haney actually favors and likes. I think there's another guy called Quinton as well. I'm not quite sure of him that Lee Haney liked. And by the same token, the smaller guys are being pushed out of Classic because the judging criteria of that particular division favors the taller guys.
Yeah, it does. It does seem to, yeah. But look, but thank goodness for the Classic bodybuilding division, though, because we've got that wonderful aesthetics that we're seeing in that division there. That's really brought so many people back to the sport. It's huge. I'm emceeing, our state shows, and the popularity of that division is just is sensational, and the guys are looking fantastic. So thank goodness that we've got that. But at least people are being punished. Competitors are being punished for distension. You've only got to, if you think back, the 90s bodybuilders will keep going on about stuff, but in the late 90s, there were some competitors there that when they started using insulin, their waists were just outrageous. They were just, they absolutely looked pregnant. And then that continued on, but at least that's been reined in. And if they go on stage now looking like that, Steve Weinberger or Arnold's judges, they're not going to make the first, second, or third call out. So I don't know. Look, and the other thing is that Samson's physique is revered. All he's got to do is try and dial in that seal skin that he's got on the back. Once he gets that a bit drier and crispier, he's right there. He's still top 3 in the world, and he's knocking on the door of top 2. So it's just that's a condition thing with him. But
you know what they said? I was saying, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, and we'd all have a party. A lot of guys have always had those question marks behind them. Can they do it? Can they put it together? And they just relegated to the dustbins of history in terms of the bodybuilding archives, because they've never been able to do it. So,
that's true. But that's it. There's a lot of ifs and buts with if you can do that. But his physique is revered, and I've seen a lot of the judging wrap ups where they say that's all he's got to do. But even Hardy Schupan himself, I consider, I'm not a great big fan of his physique, But what he did with his waistline from last year's Olympia till this year's Arnold Classic, how he brought that in with that vacuum, it was mind-boggling. He must have been working bloody hard to do that, because that's not easy. So that was for me very, very reassuring and interesting that he did that, and that's why he had a clear win at the Arnold Classic this year in Ohio.
One of my favorite podcasts out there these days is the Jay Cutler podcast, because the conversation that he has with his guests is just fantastic, I think. And one of those characters that is really divisive in the sport. A lot of people love him or they either hate him. But he has, one of the interesting links to the past is Sergio Oliva Jr. And he was on the podcast this week. Right. And let's watch this clip about what I thought was particularly interesting.
Like, look, I learned something from Dorian I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do all those workouts all the time. Like we were talking about before we had the camera on. I've trained high volume my whole life. I do pyramid training. If I would have started maybe with Dorian's training, then maybe my body would have been able to do that. But I can't do pyramid high volume I've been a pro 10 years now. And then I'm going to do one set. You can do a little, he'll let you do a little warm up. You do one set, like let's say it's...
Give me an example.
Let's say it's
that you did, like that you actually went.
You start with. I had to argue with him to let me start with 135 because he wants to just start with 2 plates. So I would do 135, and then the next one is 3 or 4 plates. That's it, and you just do it as many times as you can, and then when you can't, he does force reps, and then when you're done, go to the next thing. Dexter's yelled at me before several times because I trained like 2 hours. I trained very long. But we were training 45 minutes, sometimes less. It was just...
What was your nervous system like?
Yeah, it was so... Like my joints were just so battered. Your nervous system is... And because you want to do so good for him, because it's him, you are going past failure and you are doing things you never did, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily training that muscle, all those extra reps. I could have been training a bunch of other muscles.
Yeah, because you're just getting it done.
Yeah,
right?
ACL.
Yeah.
So yeah, the part where he said particularly that kind of caught my eye was how his dad lost to Arnold, and then Sergio Sr. went to go train with Arthur Jones and made massive improvements training under Arthur's tutelage. Came back, still lost to Arnold, but then Arthur Jones taught Mike Mensa. Mike Mensa taught Dorian, and Sergio speaks in this whole episode about his time in living in Spain and training under Dorian's tutelage. So it's kind of come full circle in a way, which I thought was pretty cool. What do you think of Sergio himself? And do you think the guy who's had so many, probably more downs and ups in his bodybuilding career, it's a very checkered competitive career.
It is.
What do you think of his future, or what do you think of the guy in general?
Well, I love his physique. And he's so similar to his dad, and I still say Sergio Oliva Jr.'s got better quads than his dad. I mean, some people might go, "Oh, steady on Craig," but he's got
better quads than his dad. The bodybuilding legs these days, I think, are overblown because the classic physique of yesteryear, like Arnold, people criticize Arnold's legs, but the focus of the classic physique was never the legs.
That's right, true. Yeah, but no, he's got a sensational physique. I think Sergio himself has had a little bit of trouble with his waistline in the last few years. But, he hasn't competed in recent times, so I don't know what he's going to do at his next showing. What lets him down is that he seems to be a very anxious person. He's definitely got a lot of insecurities. I don't know if that stems from his father or not, but I've seen him online, and it's just, by jingoes, is he a troller? He loves to get caught up in the negativity, and he'll argue and argue and argue. But with that, you can see there's a level of anxiety. He needs to try to sort of, I don't know, be maybe a little bit more positive, because I think it affects his mental health, and then that's going to affect his. To have a champion mindset, you just don't want to be poo-pooing everybody all the time and thinking he could be spending his time doing much better things with himself. He's an interesting cat, as Chris Cormier would say.
One of the things that they didn't touch on in the interview so much, but I think anybody that potentially trains under Dorian, perhaps the best lesson that they could ever take away from the guy is not so much his training, because I think Dorian was one of those very few rare individual cases, like Sergio mentions in the interview, that HIT has ever worked for or will ever work for. Dorian didn't win because of his training, because eventually we saw physiques which eclipsed his, maybe not in terms of the conditioning, presented with the same level of mass, although, you know, maybe you could sort of say that, you know, there has been since then. But the guy started to get bigger, or as big as Dorian, after a certain period of time. And I mentioned in my video about Dorian Yates that he was, you know, attributed as his high intensity training that transformed his physique. But it wasn't. It was the availability of growth hormone and insulin, particularly in Europe, more so that at that time available than America. You know, they were a little bit late in the game and catching on. And that was once it filtered through, the physique started catching up in the same. They didn't all start doing HIT training. But by the by, I think anybody that trains with Dorian, regardless of whether they resonate with his HIT training or not, I think the best lesson that they could take away from him is a lesson in mindset. And if anybody could benefit from that lesson more than anybody, it would have been Sergio. You know, just kind of, you know, learn from Dorian's Zen-like, you know, ultra-focused mentality.
Yeah, no, I agree. And having just developing a thicker skin. And,
absolutely. Yeah.
And, you know, not
his dad was very thin-skinned too. And I sort of thought, you hate your dad in a way. Like, you're very kind of contentious about the way your father brought you up and didn't support you and all the rest of it. And you're very begrudging of that. Yeah, well, join the queue, mate. A lot of people have grown up without fathers and also abusive fathers, and they've had to persevere, you know, and not lean back on those memories. But the thing is, his dad was the fucking same, and he cannot see it, that his dad was very outspoken. His mouth got him into trouble all the time. He was always bitching. Probably rightfully so. He probably did get shabby treatment in regards a lot of the time from the IFBB, being a black foreign bodybuilder, especially, you know, going up against Weider's poster boy, which was Arnold, the Aryan at the time. So, but Sergio can't see that his own inclination towards negativity is what draws all this shit in at the end of the day.
I know. I agree with you 1,000%. But honestly, that point that you made about the Dorian Zen-like sort of mindset, where he just was able to sort of put everyone else out, you know, get the blinkers on. I think Chris Estedo was a good coach for Sergio Oliver, because Chris is quite good with mindset, and it's probably quite calming on him. But anyway, it was a good move going to train with Dorian. I know you're not big on HIT training, but the way he...
I'm actually doing Dorian's bodybuilding split at the moment. Like, I'm doing to the T. Same exercises, same split. No, I'm not. I don't shit on Dorian Yates' training by any means. I think it's excellent. I think HIT is definitely a tool in the toolbox. However, I don't think it works exclusively to the dismissal of everything else. I think this is a mistake that a lot of people make with their training, is that they think that you know, they see the whole bodybuilding equation as a nail that needs only a hammer, and no, it can actually benefit from a lot different techniques than just HIT.
I can just imagine some of the little chats that they have, you know, after the workout, before the workout over there. Maybe Dorian might be having one of his little chuffs there, you know, with one of his little his little joints that he likes to have, and I'm sure that. I think Sergio is one of those people that definitely likes to imbibe that as well. So I think a lot of the pros these days will definitely get on the marijuana. You know, it's just another tool in their drug stacks that they like to use. But another guy that is really famous for his intensity of training, he featured a interesting little clip this week on his Instagram, and it shows that you can still, deep into your later years, have a fantastic mindset towards training and also have a great physique. And that's, you know, one and only, none other than Tom Platz. So let's watch this clip here.
Yeah. Okay. No prep. Almost 70 years old. If I actually trained again, I'd probably put it together. But hey, it's fun to me. See you later. Bye.
Yeah, so what did you think of that video there by Tom Platz on his Instagram this week? 69 years old.
Sensational. I was a massive fan of Tom Platz. I had his book, Pro Style Bodybuilding, which I catastrophically lost. And I've been looking everywhere for it. I think it's under a bed in my spare room. I've got to find that thing. I tried to buy it on YouTube. No, not on YouTube, on Amazon. I tried to buy it. And that book was selling for over $300 American. And it wasn't new either. If we can talk about the Olympia's injustices, those that never won an Olympia, but the 1981 Olympia, I still say there was a case for him to win, even though his legs were a bit big. But I know I love Tom. I love his attitude, his mindset. Brilliant. And so when I saw that, I just thought, wow, that's sensational. And
that's what we all aspire to at the end of the day, is to, you know, I don't like this tendency for a lot of guys just to sort of say bodybuilding was a phase that I went through, and now that I'm 30 years of old, I'm too old to continue this, and then they put it aside. I do hear a lot of younger ones saying that. They go, I'm approaching 30, and I think I'm getting too old for bodybuilding, and I need to put it aside before I do some damage. And what the fuck are you talking about, you morons? You know, so if you're passionate about the eye game like you and I are, it's something that you just want to keep doing until you fucking drop.
Well, and look at all the studies now that are showing that how important muscle mass is for anti-aging. I mean, it's a glycogen dump. It's for metabolic health, your muscle mass, and also to avoid cognitive decline.
What kind of amazes me about Tom, because Tom, okay, let's use the nice word. He was a bit of a lunatic in the gym, and his training was insane. Like, it was crazy. I don't know if you've ever seen those form videos where he's doing kind of partials and halves, and he keeps the set going for extended for like 5 minutes, and you know the form is all over the place. It's completely wacky. It just, if the weight moves, it's a rep to old Tom. But the thing with, you know, Tom used to lift some fucking massive weights, particularly when he was squatting, but he never had the same career, life disrupting injuries as Ronnie Coleman did.
I know.
And it's amazing that he was able to continue, still even these days, continuing to train intense.
Yeah, I know. That's right. It's mind-boggling how those knees, the knees of Tom Platz must have, I don't know.
He needs to donate them to science for study and research.
It must have like platinum bloody tendons or something. I don't know what's going on. Or tungsten tendons.
Tungsten Tom, platinum tendons.
Yeah, I know. There's just incredible how he can just still do those full squats and you know, his spine seems to be totally fine. Okay, he snapped that bicep. You know, that was a tragedy. I remember when I saw that in the magazines, it was like, oh no, you know, I was devastated. But
it was funny that Arnold convinced him to compete, knowing full well that Tom was going to end up with a shit result. So I think Tom was very bitter towards Arnold with that. But
just always respect for Tom, and hopefully you and I can have a chat about, like I say, the best bodybuilders that never won an Olympia, and I can have my 2 cents worth on the 1981 Mr. Olympia.
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, I used to think it was probably more a Danny Padilla contest, but I sort of think no, I probably would lean more in favor of saying Tom.
It was Danny or Tom, Shawn. It was
anybody but Franco, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. Recently on another channel, I think it was Max Mark Muscle, he listed his top Olympias winners in order of his preference, and we were going to do a quick top 5 favorite Mr. Olympias ranked of our own preference. Without kind of a lot of explanation and extrapolation, like, who do you think would be your top 5? Maybe with just like a brief sentence for each guy.
Yeah. Look, this was a juicy video, and I know you
juicy. It was monolithic. It was like fucking 40 minutes long.
Yeah, I know. I know you see Max Marks as a bit unusual, but I've sort of warmed to his humour. But I was like you at first when I saw his YouTubes. I thought, this is a bit wacky, but then I'm sort of getting used to it. But I quite like the premise. So that led me to think about who my top 5 were out of the 18. Is it 18 Mr. Olympias now? I think there's 18.
I've lost count.
I'm pretty sure there's 18, but I've come up with my 5. And
okay, let's have it.
Yeah.
Number 1.
Well, do you want me to start at 5 or 1?
I'm going to start 1 to 5. Yeah. So your favorite.
So, well, obviously number 1 was the DY Dorian Yates. Just the way he's changed.
Of course, because you're British and you're a Dorian nut hugger.
I am, but I really liked his physique just in general. So definitely Dorian. But my number 2 is...
What I'll do is I'll counter him with my top ones, as my tops as well. Yeah, if that's all right.
Let's do that.
So my favorite, I sort of think the greatest of all time, simply because he had the least structural flaws. He had the best overall package presenter. He was also that bridge between classic and modern day bodybuilding. That has to be Lee Haney, the undisputed GOAT of bodybuilding. People talk Ronnie, but Ronnie has some shit showings in years. But Lee Haney, every year, I think, was undisputed.
Well, he's my number 2, Lee Haney. Definitely number 2. I just every year I used to go to the newsagent to get that magazine and look at Lee Haney, you know, because I mean we didn't have the internet, so we just had to get the magazines and see what he looked like. But his physique was phenomenal. I mean, I always like the Mr. Olympias, Shawn, that have got the big back. So I think again we go back to what we had in our physique. So my back when I competed was one of my better body parts. You tend to sort of get drawn to that. So I love the Mr. Olympias with the big back. So that's why I like Yates. I just thought his back was phenomenal. But Lee Haney's back was just, talk about the Cobra, you know, the Cobra King. But he had the tiny waist, great abs. His quads, I still say his quads were pretty good, you know.
He had his physique. Fantastic. Definite mass with class.
Yeah. He had the mid-attached biceps, but he cleverly sort of, when he posed his bicep, he sort of turned his wrist around and to shorten them, and the way he did that was very clever, and he had a great mindset. He had a champion mindset. It was.
I love Lee. Total gentleman of the sport. Never had any shit or any kind of things that are, you know, associated with bodybuilders with big egos or, you know, like kind of, you know, married his childhood sweetheart, has raised great kids.
Oh, yeah, true.
You know, he's just, if you want to hold like somebody who's the pinnacle of the sport, and because people find him boring because he's got no dirt or peccadillos like a lot of these bodybuilders, you know, he gets dismissed by a lot of, you know, because there's nothing to talk about with Lee except for his greatness. But I have number two. My number two is Arnold for sure. Arnold, you know, he transcends bodybuilding. He might not have had my favorite physique of all time, but I think just in terms of his resonance as a Mr. Olympia, I don't think we can go past him. Who's your number three?
Well, my number three, you might be sad to hear this one, but and it's due to his I guess all-round persona in bodybuilding, and I did like his physique in 2009. That was Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler was a bit of a fridge, you know. He had a bit of a thick waist, but I watched all of his Battle for the Olympia DVDs, those Mitsuru Okabe DVDs, and weeks out from a show, he just, because I do like the mass monsters, and he just the size of him. I remember when I was watching, and I was watching his VCRs. That's right, and I just thought, wow, this guy was it was massive. And then he'd get up on stage, and all those years, he came second to Ronnie, and he just had that tenacity to just keep going. And he just, Chris Aceto would tell him, you are going to win one day. He's done for the sport as an ambassador too, you know, like in the off season, he'd do lots of guest posings. He was always there amongst his fans. He had time for his fans, and now he's putting it back in with a tremendous the Cutler Cast, that podcast with Milos, and
he's definitely one of the classier, more intelligent representatives of the sport, and I think he's the template for financial success that other bodybuilders, because a lot of bodybuilders bailed out of the sport and they were broken penniless. But you know, besides Cutler and say Shawn Ray, they were some of the very first few that sort of showed that you did have life after bodybuilding and you didn't have to be living in your car broken penniless. I think my number three is going to be a surprise to you, and that's Phil Heath. I think that after Dorian, he ushered in a new look, which undoubtedly dominated. And of course, you can't argue with 7 Olympia wins. I think it was also, and it's kind of funny because a lot of these Olympia picks, I think that, you know, you and I are doing, it's not because of almost the best physique. It's because of the other intangibles that are associated with the guys themselves. I think like Phil Heath, you know, even though he was a little bit bitchy and whiny and he carried on a lot of times, he was the first social media star. So he didn't have a path on how to navigate those difficult waters of social media like any other champion before him. So you had Phil Heath with an excellent physique, and it did deteriorate over the time, undoubtedly, like a lot of these guys do, they burn out. But I just sort of think, again, competing against extremely competitive fields for their age, Phil Heath, especially against Kai Green, because Kai Green, if Phil Heath wasn't there, would have been a dead ringer for a lot of those Olympia wins, and it was an absolute battle. Yeah, and he had a great mindset too, Phil Heath, in a way. He did. He
did. But you know what, Shawn, he entrusted his faith in a great coach called Haney Rambod, who must be great on their mindsets. I don't know, but he didn't. You know, like a lot of these guys, they flick around from you know, one coach to the next. If they don't have a good showing, they'll poo-poo that coach. They'll go online and tell them that they're no good, and then they'll go to another coach. he stuck with Haney Rambod. They became great friends, and I think that's a testimony to his loyalty there, how he did that, and he definitely benefited as a result, as a person, but particularly as a competitor. And kudos to Phil Heath. He's not in my top 5, but I've definitely got admiration for him, that's for sure. And I would agree with your points.
How about top 4?
Yeah, so number 4, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, definitely. So, look, I remember my dad took me to see Pumping Iron at the Octagon Theatre at UWA in 1977. There was a showing there, and I was only 12 years old. And I was just awestruck. I couldn't believe what we were seeing. In fact, even my dad couldn't believe it, and he was a former bodybuilding himself. And we went with another mate of his who was into weight training. He was a big man. So from then on, it was just, wow, this guy Arnold. He really did have almost like a classic physique. His waist, interestingly, he had pretty wide hips. He had a pretty wide waist, but all those twisting poses, he was a master poser. And he had a great back too, fantastic back. And people bag out his legs, but I tell you what, you look at his VMO and, the muscle bellies that he's got in his quadriceps, he just didn't have adductors. He had no adductors at all, but his quads were pretty damn good. And for the day, really, there was no one going to go close. But it was just a great physique. I think everybody liked his tenacity and his champion mindset that he had. Everyone sort of
his mindset was second to none. I don't think anybody had a better mindset, not even Dorian and Arnold, because it was funny, back in the day, Schwarzenegger rattled Dorian a couple of times. Dorian didn't respond in any overt manner, but Dorian still complains about it, that Arnold was, in his face and trying to ruin the vibe. So, it definitely probably did have some kind of resonance. Probably just made Dorian train harder. But, so the thing about Arnold, you sort of said he had a nice classic physique. It's funny because Arnold was considered the mass monster for his era. So anybody that came after Arnold had to be basically better than Arnold, because Arnold was the first Mr. Olympia to include both size and conditioning, because before him, they were either big or they were either conditioned, but they were never both. So Arnold set that ball rolling for ultra muscularity and ultra definition, and all the bodybuilding champions after that had to one up or be better than Arnold in that regard.
Look, I think I agree with you. And so, there was Sergio Oliver Sr. and Arnold. They were the masthetics at the time, weren't they? They really were. And the other thing, I quite often like about those sorts of physiques is I'm quite often drawn to the guys that have got the shorter torso and the longer legs. They seem to be that seems to be a physique that I like the look of.
My number 4 was Sergio Sr. I sort of think that he had probably the best genetics in the bodybuilding history, besides maybe like Flex Wheeler. And I think if Arnold hadn't been around, again, he would have been probably the most dominant person of the bodybuilding era. Like Arnold, he didn't even have a lot of competitors when he competed, because he was just that dominant in his class. So, I
love the myth. He was fantastic. I remember my dad read an article or read something about him, and he had a 56-inch chest, he had a 28-inch waist and 28-inch thighs. There was something like that. Those were his proportions for a fairly short man, and I just thought that was incredible for the time. You wouldn't have disputed any of those measurements. Having a chest twice as big as your waist, fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, his proportions were just unbelievable for the time. And if people want to talk about how the sport is so political and they get fucked over these days, like some of our foreign champions want to complain about politics, Sergio really was the victim of a lot of politics back in the era. Number 5, Craig.
Well, interestingly, it was a toss-up between the myth, but I really loved Samir Banou's physique. I just thought when he won in 1983, that level of condition that he brought in 1983 was incredible. It was the condition of Zane, but with just more muscle.
A one-hit wonder, perhaps, but definitely.
It was. The problem was, Shawn, that in the next year in '84, he was up against Lee Haney, who he beat in '83 anyway. But he tried to come in bigger. In '84, and he shouldn't have done that. He should have just stuck with the game plan. what he did in '83. But honestly, that back double biceps picture when he was on stage in '83 is one of the greatest back double bicep shots you'll ever see. He, his legs, he didn't have the big adductors, but he still had really pleasing legs to look at. Quadriceps, his hamstrings, he didn't have the big bowing hanging hamstring, but it was still pretty impressive. But what a physique, what an abdominal wall he had, and he was a great poser too. And he sort of facially looked really good too. And he had an air of confidence about him when he spoke. The Lion of Lebanon. He still loves the sport, and he loves to commentate and chip in where he can. And he's a real character. He's a funny fella. And he had a classic physique too. But so he's definitely in there for me.
My top 5 was Dorian Yates, simply because I think that, he definitely has his part in bodybuilding history for being one of the people that changed the game of the sport with his size and level of conditioning. He ushered forth something that never had been seen in bodybuilding before and became almost like a standard for the preceding years to then try to emulate and try to, improve upon what he had done. But right, yeah. I don't know whether that has been achieved, but nobody can argue with the results that he had with very limited resources at the time. He never had a coach. He only had himself to fall back on, and his own sheer spirit of will, and nothing fancy, no coaches, no wild exotic potions and drugs mixed up. Everything was just pure basics, hard work, and blue collar sweat with that guy. And I don't think you can be anybody in the sport of bodybuilding that can't, at least, even if you didn't like his physique so much, respect the effort and the ethos that Dorian possessed during those years. So he's my sure pick for number 5.
Yeah, and to go with that, he was a sensational poser as well. We've spoken about this before. You talk about the great Mr. Olympians. You'd want to hope that they're a great poser as well, and he was. He turned himself into tremendous poser, master poser. But let's not forget what happened in 1993 with those black and white photos that appeared in that magazine. I remember picking that magazine up in the newsagent and looking at it and, just thinking, what the hell? And all of his fellow competitors thought exactly the same thing. That's what they've said. Paul Dillett, Flex Wheeler, when they saw those pictures that were released, that just scared the crap out of it. That was a turning point in the sport of bodybuilding.
That moment too, how like when people sort of say, you remember where you were and what you were doing, like when 9/11 happened, or when man first stepped on the moon, or all these kind of defining moments. I always sort of think that's bodybuilding's version of that event, because I still remember again in the news agency picking up that very issue of the magazine and thinking, what the fuck is this?
I know.
And I think that those pictures will forever resonate in the minds of bodybuilding fans forever, and they were just game changing at the time. I did a review a little while back on the Phil Heath documentary that came out. It was a rock-based production. He found a way to insert himself, the old Rock, as he always has to do. What is to do? He can never share the limelight. No. But what did you think of the overall production of that? Because I thought it was really well done. I had my niggles with it, but I was just being a little bit nitpicky. But what did you like or maybe dislike in a short summary?
Well, look, it was on Netflix, wasn't it? Is that right?
No.
Yeah. Was it Stan? I can't remember.
Doesn't matter.
No,
just give me your opinion.
No, because what I've noticed is that documentaries have become incredibly popular lately, and the quality of this documentary was fantastic. The way they sort of looked at different timelines, but the way that they depicted his tough upbringing. His father wasn't too flash. He had a fantastic mother. Obviously, he had his mother's mindset.
I didn't think his upbringing was tough at all. What the fuck was he going on about? He was a privileged, pampered little rich kid.
Yeah, it's just
he wasn't from a tough part of town. He had a couple of life incidences, as we all do. Seeing the guy shot in front of him would have been pretty traumatic, but he didn't have a tough upbringing.
Yeah, I don't think he had a great role model in his father, which
none of us did. Or maybe you did, but not too many of us bodybuilders did. That's a very kind of like prominent theme in a lot of like top bodybuilders' lives. Absent fathers or fathers who are abusive.
Well, but boys always and young men, they always look to other people for role models, so they'll find one. So I was lucky. My dad was a good role model, but I think that documentary depicted what you can do when you've got great genetics and a great mindset. It really it showed that it showed his insecurities, but then it showed his strengths too, and it also showed just how tough the sport of bodybuilding is. It's a bloody hard sport. It showed his loyalty to his coach. He didn't keep chopping and changing coaches, and I just
not so much loyalty to the wife though, who was dying of cancer.
Yeah, well, they did.
Conveniently, kind of left that little bit out.
Yeah, that was brushed under the carpet. Yes, true. I agree. So, I thought in general it was pretty good. I did enjoy it. I know Louise, my partner, she enjoyed it too, which is interesting.
Even Charmaine, my partner, said that was the best documentary that she had seen in bodybuilding. So I think for the average person, a lot of people could just resonate with it. And I think the beautiful production of it as well. It was definitely cinematic quality. And that's very rare because a lot of the Generation Iron documentaries, they got that clunky kind of amateurish feel about them. And this one definitely didn't have no signs of amateur, fingerprints on it. So
no. Well, that's why I asked if it was a Netflix one, because all the Netflix docos are just mind-boggling. They're so good. And the quality of this was very, very good. And it was, it didn't drag on. It was just the right length in time. It's worth a watch, particularly if you've got any sort of, finger in the iron game. You'll enjoy it for sure.
I think that was one of the weaknesses as well, because I don't know whether the average person could pick that film up and understand what bodybuilding's about just from watching it, because obviously it was Phil Heath centric because it's his story. But they needed just to explain the context of bodybuilding a little bit more. There was just a few nuances in the show itself with some of the judging decisions towards the end and why they moved certain guys around and why perhaps Phil's physique was winning and then why perhaps it wasn't winning. And like someone could pick up Pumping Iron that has no affiliation with the sport and still watch it on both an entertaining and an educational level. But I don't think they could do that. They would learn about Phil Heath, but not so much about bodybuilding.
Oh, no, you're right. Yeah, I mean, definitely. It was just an interesting take on his character and his character development and the way he stuck to his guns and his mindset and it's something a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, I loved it, and I love that they still keep making these documentaries and that. And I really always encourage people to go out and watch them. This is why I make reviews, because most of these YouTube bodybuilding channels, they don't give a shit about what's coming down the pike in terms of new books, new documentaries, old stories that need retelling. They're just very kind of, centered on what their content is. But if we don't encourage people to keep going and seeing and watching these things and supporting them with their eyeballs and their dollars, then they're not going to be made. And we'll have a whole history that's lost to us because it won't be retold in any kind of professional way.
Yeah, I agree. And, people these days are just, they're so, I think the general population's got attention deficit disorder. So they're only interested in watching 2 or 3 minute, little clips or those, what do they call it? That doom scrolling, where they're just looking at even clips that are, less than a minute. But
well, it's the same with my content as well, because my content doesn't get a lot of views. It's a niche within a niche within a niche. But when I look at the channel analytics of my content, like I try to be engaging with my storytelling and stuff that I do with my videos or present something that's new and different. But 75% of my audience in my videos click off the video in the first 30 seconds. So that means these 25-minute videos that I do, 30-minute videos, 10-minute videos, whatever, 75% of the people cannot make it through the first 30 seconds. And I just sort of think, that's an indictment on what a bunch of fuckwits we have following the sport, but also what a bunch of fuckwits we have in society at large who can't even get past 30 seconds on a video that they've clicked on.
Yeah, that's why we need to keep encouraging people to check out these longer sort of things that have got some interest in it.
Or train your fucking attention spans as well as your biceps, you dumb bitches.
Yeah, that's right. True. But I will say,
fucking book and read or something. Like brush up on your learning comprehension.
Yeah. but more people do need to be seeing some of these amazing montage videos that you've done are incredible. So they need to really, like you say, persevere and watch them through, because some of the things you're doing on your channel is a real niche and it's very cool. And I think you need to keep it going. I know every single comment that I read from your videos that you put up, people, you just got glowing reviews all the time. So there are a lot of people out there that do watch it, and they're really
it's a very small, consistent, and loyal audience that I have. And the guys that chip in with the comments, they're not only super supportive, but they add in their own little points of discussion as well, which I love reading because it adds to my own education and spin on things as well. But it's just a little bit disappointing being in the content production game these days, where it does take a lot of money because this shit doesn't come free. Like all these things that, these tools that you use to make the videos, they cost a lot of money. And, to be completely transparent, my channel doesn't even bring in $20 a week in terms of ad revenue. So it doesn't even cover costs. But then also when you see some of these absolute fucking milquetoast, tragedy, boring shit channels, like there's a lot of channels now that are doing these bodybuilding similar documentaries to what I do, but they just go around the internet and then they assemble clips of like different interviews or talking points, and then they'll use artificial intelligence voices to do the narration of the script, because of course they can't read they can't fucking read or write the script themselves. So it's probably written by Chat GPT and then read by an artificial intelligence. And I see that these fucking videos are racking up hundreds of thousands of views, and I just sort of think, what the fuck do people watch this shit for? Like, I cannot get through 30 seconds of it. And that's just my own personal rant, but it's quite discouraging as a content maker. And I sort of think, well, this is the future. I don't belong in it in terms of YouTube content production.
You can tell the AI ones, I must admit, I'm not drawn to those. I like the more personal, sort of raw, grainy sort of touch. And that's why I really like your eclectic, channel with you've got your own little niche there going there. And so, but you've got to keep that going. I know it's a lot of work. Some of those where you've got like 1,000 images in one, in one video that you put up, but it's really well done, and I enjoy it. But also, just as a side note, I really enjoyed your chat with Robert Sykes, the carnivore guy. That was the keto savage guy. That was interesting too. So that was another.
Yeah, and again, it was an interview that only got 300 views, but people will tune in hundreds of thousands of views to some fucking muppet, that talks about drugs. And it's another pet hate that I have, these channels which are just ultra drug focused, and you have these dickheads who have achieved nothing in bodybuilding, never even stepped on a stage before. The closest they've got is a selfie in the bathroom, yet they will spend 20 minutes on a video listing 30 different drugs that young kids can get hold of on the internet and take in order to get down to perhaps 12% body fat. And I just sort of thought, this is the fucking annoying trend of where YouTube is going, that these dickheads will garner hundreds of thousands of followers and hundreds of thousands of views for absolute dog shit content, which is driving bodybuilding in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this generation, I guess, are looking for the magic bullet, and that's been going on for probably the last
it needs to be
20
put in their
years.
fucking heads. That's the magic bullet. I'll pay for it.
Look, Shawn, it's the age of instant gratification that we're living in, and unfortunately,
and it's completely antithetical to bodybuilding. That is the whole point that I'm making. The age of instant gratification. You need to go find another fucking sport, because bodybuilding is not for you. It requires concentration, focus, attention, patience, moderation, temperance.
That's right.
All these things that today's society just don't have, as a glaring overall fucking weakness to their character at the end of the day. Nothing to do with their physiques. It's the character that's preventing them from getting anywhere. Sorry to go all Jamie Lewis on you there, but I've got to take off, Craig. It's been wonderful talking to you, and hopefully we can continue to do this weekly and insert some more good discussion, because I've really loved having a chat with you. And,
I always love being on your channel. Always great to have a chat with my wingman, Shawn Stone. So, thank you for having me on again, and I look forward to the next time for sure.
Yeah, check out Craig's Instagram as well, because he posts a lot of his own career. He's up to an absurd number of contests that he's competed in. He's a wealth of knowledge. So go check out his content rather than these dickheads on YouTube who know nothing and have done nothing in the sport, and support those that have. So thanks again, Craig. Bye.
Good on you, Shawn. See ya.